All right, so let's just jump right into the topics. Basically, the anti-aging conference I just went to involved the top researchers looking at what is the science behind aging and how do we stop that aging, right? And so, to give you some ideas, none of these were blog post hackers, health experts, right? People that you see on Facebook. These are the actual researchers pushing the science, right? They're the ones in the trenches actually looking at the genes and the DNA and the enzymes. And in case you didn't know how this works, is they will publish some studies. Those studies will be probably read by some people who are into it, like me. And then we will write some article or some content that then usually someone else then reads, and they kind of post a Facebook meme, and then it gets so watered down, right? So what we're really learning at this conference is stuff that they're doing that isn't even published yet. It probably won't be published for another, typically it's a 1 or 2 year process before it's published, right? And so, and the reason I'm saying this is because some people who aren't scientists like me don't realize that a lot of things that you're reading isn't really quite science, right? It's not firsthand data. It's been sort of watered down multiple layers. It's like whispering down the lane. Remember that game? You whisper something into someone's ear and they kind of tell the next person, 10 people later, it is completely different, right? And so most of the stuff that you're seeing online has that effect on it, right? And keep in mind that also these are researchers. They're not, well, some of them did own companies. And so there was a little bit of sales behind their message, but 80% of the researchers, they're not selling anything, right? They're researchers. And so I appreciate that because there's no sales, there's no like hidden open loop, NLP, all that stuff that all the marketers know, right? There's none of that. This is just pure information, right? So what I'm about to tell you is, in my mind, unwatered down. It's not watered down, not skewed information because they're trying to sell you something. So that's really important to kind of get through before we get into the science of it, right? So here's the science. One key piece of information that you really want to pay attention to is we'll call it the chemistry of the body, right? So we learned a lot. So I'm trying to make it as super simple as possible. So they talked about the genes, the enzymes, the specific proteins that they're learning to activate that's extending lifespan by 30, 40, 50, 100%, 200% in animals, right? And they strongly believe that this will be very quickly applied to humans in the next couple of years. And so when I started to look at all the molecules from a chemical perspective, right, there's Sirutin-6, SIRT6. If you're a scientist and you want to go and Google this stuff, if you want the actual names of it, it's like SIRT6. They also looked at reverse transcription inhibitors, right? And so think of it as stuff that is like writing DNA information. They're learning how to sort of block some of the processes. And what they're really using is they're using actually drugs designed to treat HIV, and they're finding that it has life extension benefits, right? Keep in mind that these are researchers operating under the umbrella of, can I discover one isolated molecule that can do this? And I'll talk about how that also is a semi-skewed and potentially flawed premise. But however, the information they're giving us on how to extend lifespan is actually very important, right? And so from a molecular perspective, we now are able to identify very specific metabolites in our body, like SIRT6. And if you just Google or go to PubMed and type in SIRT6 or SIRT1, there's actually 1 to 7 of them. They're heavily involved in preserving our body in general, right? And if you look up SIRT6, it actually has cartilage anabolism effects. That's fancy for growing cartilage in your body. And I've been saying for a long time that what we believe about arthritis, or the wearing and thinning of your joint cartilage, we now know can actually be reversed. Yes, it can be reversed, right? And so without surgery and definitely don't get injections of cortisone. It's like the worst thing ever because it actually breaks down cartilage. Right. So again, these molecules are being discovered. They also know very specific genes that they can actually epigenetically turn on again to express longevity, basically. Now, if I were to tell you all these genes, all the epigenetics, and all the proteins and all that stuff, you might be thinking like, what am I going to do with that? So what they were, again, looking at were very specific, almost drug things, right? So for example, they took fisetin, which is an extract from a plant, which is amazing. I actually take it. They were able to isolate and change the form of it to make it like, 25 times better at turning on a protein that then extends lifespan. The reason they're doing this is eventually they're going to want to patent this into a drug, and so they can eventually downstream make money from it. Right? That's these researchers. And so, however, if you look at just fisetin in general, it is very, very, very amazing at extending lifespan. There's studies showing just it by itself can start to protect and reverse Alzheimer's type symptoms, right? And so when you look at all this, and having read thousands and thousands of research articles on how our bodies, from a cellular level works, I'll say this: the general concept, this is, it sounds too simple, but the simplicity of it is eat lots and lots of different types of fruits and vegetables, right? And so the great example of this is if you look at things that can, and I kind of posted this, I think yesterday or the day before, that suppresses a specific protein that actually allows your body's organs to regenerate and also has life-extending benefits. There's over 500 different food compounds that can suppress this thing, right? And so 500 different ones, right? So I can't even tell you just eat this because there's so many. And if you look at what are all those things, they're basically different fatty acids, different fruits and vegetable extracts, right? It just boils down to, again, it's almost funny when you look at the very downstream, down at the molecular level, at the root of it, essentially nature is telling us, eat a variety of fruits and vegetables. It just goes back to that, right? And so, I do want to say as a total aside, I do see some people eating a carnivore diet, like a meat mostly only diet, and they're feeling amazing. Yes, it's because you're not eating grains and you're not eating a lot of chemicals that's in our poison food supply, and you're going to feel amazing. However, long term, your body is going to need certain herbs and fruits and vegetables from a clean, non-toxic source for it to live as long as possible, right? Very important. Yes, I know a lot of people switch to carnivore diet. They're like, this is the miracle. I feel amazing. Again, it's not that the meat's amazing. It's healthy. It's that you're not eating all the industrial pesticides, right? Just in this country, we have 77 pesticides that is completely legal, whereas in other countries, it's completely not legal because it's so toxic. You're feeling amazing because you're not eating those toxins, right? It's not just that the meat's amazing. And so what it does, it biases our belief that we only need meats. See, like I feel amazing only eating meats, but really the molecular science of it shows that our bodies need these fruits and vegetables. We can now break down, I can tell you, if you're a scientist, PM me, I can break it down for you in terms of what are the polyphenols, what are the plant chemicals that then gets eaten up with fiber with the bacteria strains. Then the bacteria strains makes these chemicals that then prolong life. Like we now are starting to understand this process. Of course, none of that happens if you just eat meat, right? None of that happens if you just eat meat. And so, if you're eating keto or paleo and you're not eating fruits, well, you know what? There are a ton of nutrients in fruits that is life extending and prolonging health and all that stuff, health span, right? So when you cut out entire food group, you're basically kicking God in the nuts or the vagina and saying, why did you waste your time making this entire group of food for us, right? It just doesn't make sense to me, right? And so now keep in mind again that our food supply is poison, yes, but if you can source clean fruits and vegetables, it is absolutely necessary. So rule number one, general rule of thumb, eat lots of fruits and vegetables, varied. Again, if you want very specific chemical breakdowns and all that stuff, PM me, but for the masses, it would just bore you to death. So number two, what they found was that if they implemented a strategy, they did this on mice, right? And so because they don't have enough time to do this on humans, they can't give humans this stuff and wait like 50 years and see when a human dies, right? We would, it'd be too long before we know it. So they give it to mice, right? And so they gave it to mice, and it did exactly the same strategy for mice that were very young, middle age, and a little bit older. And of course, as we would expect, when the strategies were implemented when the mice were young, they lived the same exact strategy. They lived much longer compared to the mice that implemented at middle age. They only lived moderately longer compared to the mice that were, very old already, and they lived a little bit longer. it just makes sense, right? Because if you can stop the aging process, or at least slow down the aging process and the cellular damage starting younger, it's going to have a bigger effect. Right now, without studying, so there was, I actually purchased this device at the conference, which is I now have this device that after 25 minutes of taking this, it tells you what your functional age is. What that means is your biological age, let's say you're 40 years old. After this test, it will tell you, do you perform mentally, visually, in every which way, your hearing, your reflexes, your memory. What's the average functional age in which you perform at? And ideally, you want your functional age to be less than their biological age, of course, right? You want to be able to perform like a 30-year-old when you're 40. This is the goal, right? And so I'm literally doing this test, and someone next to me is doing the test. And it just turns out that we are the same age. We were both 44 or are 44 years old. However, the attendees that were watching us do this thing was like, how could you guys be at the same age? Because the other guy looked and performed much older. And, I told people, like, I don't have a secret recipe. I just started this when I was much younger, right? I started looking into longevity basically 26 years ago when I was 18 years old, right? So I've been doing this a lot longer. And so because I started a longevity, health extension, life extension game when I was much younger, obviously I've had a little bit more head start and a little bit more preservation going on than the other person, right? So concept number 2 is start sooner rather than later. Right? If your goal is to feel younger, operate younger, function younger when you're older, the concept is start now rather than later, right? Because this is now proven with basically animal research that the earlier that you start your longevity system or longevity strategy, not hacks. I'll give you a quote the scientists said, right? They said hacking is what non-scientists use, right? Because you're just trying a bunch of stuff. You want to understand the strategy, and therefore you can strategically implement a program, right? Versus trying something else. Now, I don't want to knock hackers, right? Because they have great intention of doing what's best for them, and then they're sharing that with other people, which is amazing. However, as the masses, I want you to make sure that you understand the framework, the difference between hackers and actual scientists, right? Because scientists aren't out there making funnels, right? They're in the lab researching all the time, right? Different use of time, right? And so start younger, that's it, number 2. The last most important thing is keep in mind that aging, there's a term now called inflammaging, right? Which is just basically it's a term meaning chronic inflammation sustained causes accelerated aging. And most chronic illnesses like cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, MS, arthritis, all the stuff that no one would ever want. If you notice, most people don't get them when they're 10 years old or 20 or 30. They tend to be later in life illnesses and diseases. Now, yes, there are a lot of pediatric cancers and all that stuff that are happening way more so now than before. That's just because, a newborn baby is born with 200 chemicals these days, right? Thank you, Mom. And so the toxic world just doesn't realize how toxic the places are. A great example of this, that I used an Airbnb in New York, and when I checked in and looked in the bathroom, I probably should have taken a picture of it. It's horrible. I'm looking at the product space. I'm like, oh my god, I really wanted to write this long letter to the host and say, you're literally swimming in toxins, basically, right? Just a great example of how people just don't know. People don't know how toxic their surroundings are, basically, right? And so inflammation, right? So you want to make sure that you're taking action to reduce your chronic systemic inflammation. And I've made tons of videos about this. And again, I'm sharing this because the now researchers are confirming basically that chronic systemic inflammation not only causes accelerated aging, it will cause you to get the cancers, the heart disease and Alzheimer's and all that stuff, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing everything possible strategically, permanently, and in an integrated lifestyle way to reduce your chronic systemic inflammation. Not bleeps and blurps, not chasing tips and tricks, not drinking lemon water in the morning because lemons can actually be very pro-inflammatory for you, unique to your blood. Not drinking alkaline water because that is completely fake. Yes, no such thing as alkaline water. Science, this is science. For the love of God, there's no such thing as alkaline water. When you drink alkaline water, it goes and hits your stomach acid. Immediately that water is neutralized. No such thing as alkaline water. So please, if you have a product that's alkaline water, just chuck it and say, I got duped. That's okay. I'm going to be a more savvy consumer going forward. No such thing as alkaline water, right? And so all fake. And then so another tip and trick would be like, just eat this diet plan. We now know we can customize your nutrition based on your bacteria, your blood, your DNA. No such thing as one diet fits all these days, right? And so customize your plan for you based on data. We have science or data now, right? So there's a company called Metabolon. We can test for 10,000 different chemicals, different metabolites, different naturally occurring stuff in your body. Yes, we have all the science now to be able to test so much, right? Now, so aside from decreasing inflammation, those are the three, right? So just to review, a variety of fruits and vegetables, very colorful, different ones, and herbs, right? Herbs include herbs in them, right? Because your herbs, also known as spices, have some of the highest antioxidants per volume compared to any other food, right? Make sure you're getting tons and tons and tons of spices, herbs, fruits, and vegetables. Basically, colorful plant stuff. That will help keep you younger and feeling younger and living longer as much as possible. Number one. And two, so tied into the inflammation and decreasing inflammation, you want to make sure that you're eating customized to you. Right? Get some testing done to see which foods, herbs, and spices are actually making you inflamed, and don't eat those and eat the ones that are healthy for you, right? So that's, inflammation number two. And of course, the third one is make sure you're acting on this as soon and as young as possible, because it will have the best chance of extending your lifespan. And your goal is, to me, there's a kind of a starting line. If you can get to the starting line, you most likely will finish the race. If you don't make it to the starting line, you obviously won't finish the race. What that starting line is you want to make sure, if you're watching this video, you can do everything possible to get to the point in human history where we can start to literally just grow organs and replace your parts with robot parts. It's coming. If you don't make it to that, if somewhere between now and then you get cancer and you die, or you get heart disease and you die, you're going to miss out on what could potentially be the greatest human history transition in current recorded history. I'll call it that, right? Probably not in human history. I don't think we've been at the most technologically advanced time ever. And so that's just my theory. And so in current recorded history, right? If you don't make it to that starting line, you're screwed, right? If you can make it to that starting line, your potential to contribute to the world and society, and if not the universe, exponentially increases along with your lifespan, right? And so how can you assure that you get to the starting line, right? By not dying. How do you make sure you don't die from cancer, which predicted next year, 50% chance of males have a 50% chance of getting cancer, 50, right? 50-50. Females have a 33% chance, right? Because of all the toxins and all the things that's been happening, plus stuff that was happening to us, years ago. And so you got to make sure that you're doing everything possible to decrease systemic inflammation. Again, I have previous videos on some of the best ways, besides customized food and testing, getting sleep, doing some type of mental practice to decrease constant state of perceived stress, right? Acute stress, amazing for you. Constant stress, not amazing for you, because it's a linear process. Anything linear is not serving of humans, right? And so we have getting rid of toxins in your body. Make sure you're detoxing. If you live in America, you got to detox once a year at least, right? At least once a year, because we live in a very toxic environment, right? And so we have, right, good sleep, detox, customized food based on data, some kind of mental practice to not be in a perceived constant stress all the time, right? And then you have so sleep and gut health, right? So you want to make sure that your gut is healthy. And we do know, right, there's an article that's been all over Facebook based on research where they kind of sampled a few Americans around, and they tested 93% of Americans have Roundup in our bodies. And everyone we've ever tested, right, through the immortal process has, everyone, 100% has glyphosate, right, Roundup in the body. And what that does is it basically wrecks our gut, right? Our guts are being wrecked, right? And so those are the 5 main things you want to make sure that you're taking care of them to decrease chronic systemic inflammation, assuming you want to live longer and be healthy and not suffer from illness and disease, right? All that stuff, right? So those are the main 3. So make sure that you're acting on those 3 on a regular basis, using a very ideally individualized and customized strategic process not a bunch of tips and tricks, right? And so in my post maybe 1 or 2 ago on Facebook, I talked about it's not the what that's the most important. Actually, the how can be more important. To give you an idea, if you're watching this video and you're like, oh my God, this is like crazy and so stressful, what are we gonna do? Know that there are solutions out there, right? So the energy and the vibration as you're approaching this can be one of practicing how do you nurture the self as you integrate these 3 things, right? The three act early, lots of fruits and vegetables and spices and herbs, and then try to decrease inflammation, right? Using and fuel it with a vibration of self-nurturing and self-love versus hypervigilance, hard work, determination, sacrifice, and all those things, right? Because if you practice using determination and sacrifice and all those things, that you get better at those things, right? Do you want to be better at sacrifice? Maybe, maybe not. You decide. Do you want to be better at determination, right? Are you just not determined enough? Maybe, maybe not, right? Be mindful of what you want to practice as you're implementing some of the actionables, the super simple actionables that I talked about, right? And so be aware of the energy, the vibration, the emotion that you're in and that you want to practice as you're acting on the what, right? In other words, pay attention to the how, right? The vibrational state that you're practicing as you're implementing the what, because that will have profound life effects in your relationships, right? In your finances, in your business, in your health, right? So it will infiltrate everything because the how that you're practicing will spew over into the rest of your life. It's not just the what, right? So hopefully you found this video helpful. Make sure you put this into action. And of course, feel free to comment with any